Sure this works. Good. I'm Steve Elmendorf. I'll give you a quick introduction. I have worked in Washington for, unfortunately, 40 years. 20 of those years I spent in government. I was in government through the entirety of the Clinton administration and the first half of the Bush administration. I have then spent 20 years in the private sector. I have a business where I primarily represent large companies, some philanthropies, trade associations, and help them sort of figure out, what to do in Washington, which is quite a topic these days. I will also tell you, on the less boring side, I am a consumer of a lot of design, art, fashion, architecture. The creative world is something I in my spare time, I spend a lot of time in and around, and I live part-time in New York, not just in Washington, because New York's a lot more interesting than Washington. So I do have some familiarity with what you all do, and I know that what we all do in Washington is, frequently seems like unimportant, but obviously now it seems very important, not just for business, but for all of our personal lives and our concerns. I will tell you also, in terms of my, I represent a lot of big business. I talk to business all the time, but I am a Democrat. Just so you know, my biases in all this. I'm a progressive Democrat who spent most of my career I've worked for John Kerry, I worked for Dick Gephardt, I worked for Hillary Clinton. But because I spend a lot of time talking to people who support Donald Trump, I try to analyze the situation in as nonpartisan a way as possible. But I also think it's good to tell people that we all have biases. I will also tell you, I want to talk about 4 things today and then hopefully get to some questions, because I also think this is more interesting if you get some questions from the audience. But I want to talk about some trends that are going on out there in our world right now, some collisions that are coming. All this is important to business, what it means for business, and then, what can you do both as business people and individuals? How should you think about this? So one of the first trend that is clearly, and this is, unfortunately, our whole world is very Trump-centric at the moment. As much as we would, there's lots of things that people can feel or think about Donald Trump. One thing that is for sure is you can never escape. Like, it's just like constant. He's in our news, he's in our feed, he's everywhere. And this economic and political nationalism, which is the first trend, is totally a focus of his. It is focused elsewhere in the world as well, but it's particularly a focus of Donald Trump's and of the Republican Party that he leads at the moment. And it has an impact, as we'll talk about, on tariffs and trades. It has an impact on immigration. Again, all these have real impacts on, I assume, all of your businesses. And then it has an impact on what we're seeing today and all year in the global conflicts, whether it's in the Middle East, Ukraine, China. Everything, he looks at everything through a lens of this economic and political nationalism which is very different from previous leaders we've had and different from previous Republican parties we've had, frankly. I was in government during the Reagan administration and both Bush administrations, and they had a very different view of the United States and its place in the world than Donald Trump has. So how he looks at tariffs, how he looks at immigration, how he looks at our conflicts in the world with other countries is all driven through this sense of really aggressive nationalism. The U.S. is right, I am right, which impacts how he approaches all these issues. The second trend is he's very focused on, and his supporters are very focused on destabilizing a lot of institutions. I've never, in my 40 years of being involved with Congress, seen a president who is so uninterested in engaging with Congress. He views them completely rather than as partners or an equal branch of government, he views them as people who should do what he wants. We are almost 6 months into this, and he has not had a meeting yet with the Democratic leadership of the Congress, which is, in our, the fact that he's not engaging in a dialogue is really something. I mean, when I worked in government during the Bush administration, like him or not, at the time I didn't like him very much. Now I think he's sort of a great institution. George Bush, we went and met with George Bush every week. Dick Gephardt, who I worked for at the time, we had breakfast with George Bush every Wednesday morning at 8 a.m. And I'm a big believer, and I assume you all feel this in your businesses, that no matter who you're collaborating with or who you're doing business with, it really helps to have a relationship and to spend time together. But he has no interest in what Congress thinks, and he is, asserting the executive branch's power over Congress aggressively. He is asserting the executive branch's dominance, or his perceived dominance over the courts and law firms in an effort to, in my view, undermine the rule of law. He is totally trying to undermine the media. Now, the media has its own problems, as we know. It has an extreme economic difficulty combined with just the changing way in which people consume it. So the media has like this two-prong thing coming at it: the economic uncertainty they face combined with the leadership of the government, which is trying to undermine their validity. And then the attack on universities and foundations is, I think has a lot of long-term impacts in terms of universities and foundations, the work they do around the world, the relationships they build for the United States, either with students or grants they do around the world. And again, this is part of the economic and political nationalism, is we don't care about having people from other countries come here and experience our world. The third trend, which is the multi-layered trend, is and this is not new. This is not new to Donald Trump. This is sort of a core of the Republican ideology for some time, which is we need to reduce government. And we all, as people who run businesses, I think, can be in some ways sympathetic to that notion, because a lot of us have to balance budgets, or we have to make a profit, more importantly. And the government's a complicated place. And he has taken it to a different level, but they are clearly on a very much, the DOGE effort and other things, trying to reduce discretionary spending in the government, trying to reduce mandatory spending, which is the difference. Mandatory spending is Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid. He's trying to reduce that a lot less than discretionary spending. This tax bill, which is coming and will pass for those who have to plan on it, it will pass before August, is an effort to reduce the revenue that's coming into the government, and they're trying to deregulate. Again, as business people, some of that is very attractive. A lot of us don't want to deal with government regulation. A lot of us think the government should spend less money. I would argue that the Trump team is coming at it in a rather aggressive way, and a way that many ways, which I'll talk about in a minute, which aren't necessarily good for business. And so all those trends are leading us to three collisions which are coming. There's going to be a big collision with the Congress in the time frame probably between September 1st and the end of the year over government spending. Every year the Congress has to pass a bill or a series of bills that fund the government for the fiscal year. And the fiscal year 26 hasn't been done yet. And Trump has proposed a budget he's proposed a budget that's rather draconian, that makes significant cuts in a lot of areas that even Republicans in the Congress would not agree to. Some of the cuts in NIH and health funding, cuts in national parks. I mean, they could not pass the Congress with any votes at the moment, and they can't, because of the nature of how Congress is structured in the filibuster in the Senate, they can't pass without some Democratic votes. And so this, and you obviously read in the news, earlier in the year they finished fiscal year 25 a few months late, and there was a lot of criticism of Democrats for not putting up a big enough fight. And that fight is coming, and that fight is coming in the fall, and it's going to be a big fight about how do we fund the government, at what levels, in what areas, what choices do we make? And that collision is Russell Vought, the head of OMB, and Donald Trump would like not to have that collision, but because of the 60 votes in the Senate, they're going to have that collision, and it's going to have an impact on all of us. The second collision that's coming, and this one probably doesn't come till next year, is the courts. I think the courts, as we've seen, move very slowly. If you look at the numbers of cases that have been filed against things that Trump has done, in almost 90% of the cases, the litigants against the administration have won at the district court level, but then they go to the appeals court, and then they go to the Supreme Court, and it takes a long time to get to the Supreme Court. I would expect that there's going to be, even today, there will be some cases, the birthright citizenship case could get decided in the next weeks. But most of these cases aren't going to get decided till next year. And the court traditionally in this time frame right now is when every year they sort of do all their important decisions. So next June to July is when you're going to see a bunch of these issues join. Does he have the right to not spend federal money that has been appropriated? Does he have the right to put an end to departments like education or USAID that Congress has created? Does he have many of the immigration things he's done? A lot of this is going to end up next year, and that's going to be a big collision. And it'll be a big collision about they say, is he going to abide by the decisions of the Supreme Court? What does this court do? It's going to be a big collision. And then this constant, again, it's going on right now, obviously, collisions with the world, from the very specific, like we're seeing today with Iran, to the sort of more general view, which goes back to his economic and political nationalism of, his relationship with the G7, his relationship with the G20, his relationship with the World Bank, with the World Health Organization, all of these NATO, all these international organizations which were formed in the post-World War II period and had enjoyed over a long period of time bipartisan support from Democrats and Republicans. He is taking on, and much of the rest of the world, as many of you know who do business in the rest of the world, is frankly quite mystified about what to do. And that's going to be, that's just going to be an ongoing series of collisions which create uncertainty for business. So what does this mean for business? One, you're going to pay less taxes generally. I think that's, the tax code, as many of you know, is complicated, and there's lots of different parts of it, personal, business, partnerships, et cetera. But at the end of the day, the tax bill that they're currently doing for the vast majority of businesses will mean less taxes, which for many people, that's a good thing. You're going to see less regulation, but I would caveat that with the Donald Trump view of the world is less regulation is good unless it's me regulating, to be honest. I mean, if you as a business person, and I've represented a lot of Fortune 50 companies for 20 years, if I had said, if Hillary Clinton was president, and I said to them, we are going to insist that we get to appoint the board of a major corporation, United States Steel, the outcry on the Republican side of socialism, and I can't believe you people are doing this, would be intense. But the deal that Trump just did with Nippon and U.S. Steel, they're basically they created a golden group of shares where the U.S. government has real rights over many of the business decisions that U.S. Steel makes. So on a regulatory front, they are, the FTC is going to do less, the FCC will do less, but where he thinks it fits in with his larger narrative of nationalism, asserting U.S. dominance, asserting control of the administration, there could be more regulation. There clearly is more uncertainty. I mean, the number one, people pay me in Washington to give them some prediction about what's going to happen. Like, I get on the phone every day with all sorts of clients and talk about what is Congress going to do? What's the administration going to do? When are they going to pass this bill? When is the rule coming out from the Federal Trade Commission? And Trump has created a world in which you just don't know. I mean, it's because they don't go through the normal processes that a government goes through to make decisions. The normal, in any White House, whether it was a Bush White House or a Clinton White House, when they make a decision, there's a whole process of And sometimes people find the process bureaucratic, and sometimes people find the process maddening, but there's a policy process, and people write memos, and it goes sort of up the food chain. This happens in many big corporations as well. And it gets to the CEO, and the CEO makes a decision based on a lot of inputs. And that's, again, that's how the government's always run. The Trump government doesn't run that way. The Trump government runs from sort of a top-down. He makes a decision, and then they all sort of scurry around to try and figure out how do we implement this. And that is not the usual way at which people are used to dealing with the government. And from a business perspective, where you'd like to know what tariff am I paying? Am I paying, right now on tariffs we have a July 9th deadline, we have an August deadline with China, but everybody knows if he gets to the deadline, what if he decides not to do it? That is not a good way to make plans. Immigration, which he is obviously obsessed about, and which the administration has had some, in recent, you've seen in the news, has had recently some significant disputes internally, has a big impact on business, obviously. It has a big impact on all of us who employ people. The reality is that the U.S. needs more people. You can have an argument about how they should get here and what vetting we should have and all that, but we do need more workers, and there are significant industries where, like it or not, many of our people don't want to do it. And he's going through this right now where they basically said we want to get our deportation numbers way up, so they started to go to restaurants and farms and everything, and then the farmers and the people who own hotels said to him, well, like, if you take all these people out of the economy, we have a real problem in providing the food you want. We have a real problem in running the hotels you want, and he's in the hotel business. And you go through the industries, there's just a huge problem that I'm not sure, again, this is where the uncertainty comes in. Between literally in the last week, we've seen he put out a tweet and said, we need to let our great farmers and hospitality industry have workers even if they're illegal, basically. And then there was a whole bunch of pushback on that, and then he said a different thing, and now I think if you're running a farm, people are like, I don't know. But I think immigration long-term is going to have a big impact. I think the university and government research spending, yes, sometimes the government spends money in a way that people don't like, but I think ultimately, if you look at the strength and dominance of the American economy over the last generation, a huge part of it has been because of our leadership in research, and our leadership in research in inventing new things. Has been because our universities are well-funded and a beacon for the world, and people want to come here and go to Stanford and go to Harvard and go to Dubuque, go a lot of different places, and those people stay here and they invent things. And you go through business after business. And I think basically without a lot of forethought, just chopping off 10% or 15% or 30% is not the way to continue our economic dominance. The rule of law is concerning for a lot of businesses, I think. Again, people want less regulation and they get annoyed sometimes, but you ultimately have to do transactions. And if you're doing transactions, it's good to know what the rules are. If you're making business contracts, if you're doing a merger, it's good to know that there is a rule of law and a law firm that will represent me. And if I end up in a situation where I'm contrary to the government, that there's a way to figure it out, to negotiate it, and so I think this fight, this aggressive going after the rule of law is frankly not good for business. And then lastly, for those of you who have foreign customers, I know this because I represented a lot of people in the travel industry. It's a big problem, and I represent actually in New York. I represent Broadway, where the people who come here from foreign countries are big customers, and they drive a lot of economic activity. And if people from Canada don't want to go to Maine, if people from Italy don't want to come here for the summer vacation, if people from China really don't want to come here, it has a huge economic impact. So this is not necessarily a good thing for business. And, I try to be dispassionate about this and not be partisan, but, yes, you can have some less taxes. Yes, you'll have less regulation, but I think the uncertainty, the workforce problems, the research problems, the rule of law, and the diminishment of our relationship with foreign people and entities is generally not going to be a positive for our economy. So just to wrap up, and I'll take questions. So what should you do? I mean, if both as an individual and as a business person, I think there's a lot of people, particularly if you don't work for a large Fortune 50 company or a large Fortune 100 company, which has a history of being engaged with Washington, you ask yourself, like, well, what can I do? And I think everybody, every business, every individual needs to figure out what's my story, like how, I've met a lot of business people who start out with the notion, I don't want to have anything to do with the government. Like, I want to run my business, I want to make money, I want to live my life, I don't want to talk to the government. As I say to many of my big business clients, the government is in your life and they're not leaving. And if you're, Delta Airlines, Goldman Sachs, Ford Motor Company, you know that. It's very clear. But a lot of other businesses basically start out with the notion, I don't really want to have anything to do with the government. But as we see with, all these issues I just raised, the government's in your life, and what can you do about it? And I think there's lots of different ways you can do it as trade associations, as groups of businesses, as an individual business. But if there are things that the government is doing that you have issues with or that you want to try and impact, one, you gotta develop your point of view and a story, and your point of view and story should totally include the economic impact of what this means to you. I mean, the number one thing I have seen for members of Congress of either party that impacts them is when people come to them from their district, from their state, and say, what you're doing either is a great thing and is going to produce a whole bunch of jobs and I'm going to build a factory, or what you're doing is going to have a devastating impact or some impact on my ability to compete, my ability to operate in your state, your district. So figuring out what's my story, what's the economic impact of my story, particularly how does it impact particular areas if you're talking to members of Congress and senators. And then, second, develop those targets. If your business exists in New York, just to use an example, obviously it's not hard to figure out who your targets are. Your targets are Chuck Schumer and Kirsten Gillibrand, and depending on where your operations are, particular members of Congress. If you're in Iowa, it's a different group of people. If you think that the administration can be impacted, it's figuring out, what are the issues what's my story that will potentially be of interest to those people. And then third and last, more and more people have to be creative, and you're all, by definition, I think, in creative businesses, in how you communicate. I mean, the biggest thing I have seen there's a lot of big things I've seen in my 40 years in government and around the government, is the difference in how we get information. And it's also obviously huge in every part of the society and every part of your business. But, people in Congress are no different. People in the administration are no different than you all are. And, when I started, we got up in the morning and we read 2 newspapers and we watched 3 TV networks and we went to bed. And now you get up and I always ask people who work for me, who are younger than I am, I said, what do you do in the morning? What's your, tell me what you do when you get up. And what information do you get when you wake up? And, I get up and even though I do it electronically, I read the New York Times and the Financial Times and the Wall Street Journal, and some 35-year-old who works for me says, well, first I go to TikTok, and then I go to Instagram, and I scroll for a while, and then, maybe I get a newsletter on a topic of particular interest to me, or a niche publication that I happen to read because I'm in some industry and Puck has a newsletter on it or something. So it's this diffusion of information that people are getting, means that as businesses, if you want to communicate, the people who work on Capitol Hill or work in the White House or work in a trade association in Washington or anywhere are just like you and me, and they are getting their information all sorts of different ways, and you have to think about how can I communicate, They're not getting up the op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, which used to be a preferred method of talking to important people in Washington, is not necessarily the way to communicate. It is with a certain segment still who are older, but people just have to be creative in figuring out how do we talk to people. So, and then, I'd say on a personal level, because I think we all, and again, I exist both in New York and Washington, we get up in the morning and we think, like, personally, what should I do? Like, this is crazy. Not only do I have this business impact, but I, am worried about the world. And and it becomes overwhelming. I mean, we're all on text chains, and you're just like every day. I mean, you just can't turn it off. And I think what I do is what is like. I can't solve the world's problems. I mean, I've been in Washington for a long time, and I used to think that I was important when I was in the government, but I'm not anymore, and I can't fix everything, and I can't solve everything. And so, what's one thing or two things that really matter to me that I can do something about, and where what's one organization that maybe is making this better in some issue I care about? How do I get involved with it, and how do I make a difference with it, as opposed to how do I, solve the whole thing? Because I think the whole thing is a bit overwhelming, frankly, and none of us here are gonna solve it all. So with that, I'm happy to answer some questions.
Yeah, I have a quick question about tariffs. So my sister's a lobbyist, and my brother-in-law is a chief of staff in the Senate. So we talk a lot about.
A lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. We talk a lot about government. And so I was talking to them about tariffs and seeing what could be done about rolling them back. I predominantly do work in Nepal, India, and Thailand. And they were both of the mindset that Congress has absolutely no ability to do anything about them from this side. And the only way to approach it is to get the foreign government on the other side to approach Trump and try to appeal to his ego and get some kind of quid pro quo, because that's all Trump will ever respond to. And I just wondered your opinion on that sort of opinion that they have, and if you agree with that assessment.
I do. I think I think I worked in the Congress for a guy who was not a free trader. And at the time, my friends in the Republican Party yelled at me all day long, and my friends in the business community yelled at me all day long, how can you work for a protectionist and free trade forever? Clearly, Trump has changed the whole dynamic around trade with the Republican Party. And Congress, and he has asserted a statutory authority through declaring an emergency that he basically can do whatever he wants. There's been court decisions, but again, the tariffs is one of the most important court decisions that's going to end up at the Supreme Court. And in the meantime, he's doing what he's doing. And it's clear he doesn't, that one, the Republican majority in Congress is not interested in taking him on tariffs. And two, that the way to, that it's not, tariffs is a very complicated legal process with, there's 232 and the Commerce Department and the USTR, and it's all very, normally done in a very bureaucratic fashion that gives people a lot of touch points, but this is not how they operate. As I said before, it's sort of top down. He decides I want to put 10% tariff on everybody, and they scurry to figure it out. So it really, I think that the pressure points are much more from the countries in which he's negotiating, you're right, and which again is complicated, and the countries are frustrated because they're used to process. And someone in the administration, someone close to the administration was telling me the administration is very frustrated because Trump likes to just make a deal. And the European Union doesn't operate that way. Like, they believe in a process and a meetings, and they have to get a consensus among their people. And so it's extremely frustrating, and it's, as a business person, I don't know what to tell you about how to predict what they're going to end up with. There's someone over there. I'll let you guys pick.
I'm just a little frustrated with when the tariffs were implemented, it was 10% for basically any import into the United States, and it was 20% for Europe. But for those 2 days that there wasn't a deal in place, we were charged 10% and 20% on top of that.
Right.
And I searched everywhere on the internet to try and find a simple explanation as to how these should be applied, because I was arguing with FedEx about it as well, and you can't find it anywhere. This is crazy. So where do we go to actually know what it is that what is the correct tariff that should be applied? Because I'm definitely holding my breath for July 9th if he does go ahead and start introducing a 50% import tariff on European goods. So.
I wish there was an easy answer to your question. And again, this is why, despite people getting frustrated with bureaucracy, sometimes you get frustrated with bureaucracy, but bureaucracy creates a process and creates information flows and creates a way for people to get information and slows things down to give them time. And again, they don't operate with any bureaucracy. They just, he asserts things, and then they chase behind him and try and figure out how to implement it. And I would say, they frequently have, the information they put out is sometimes wrong, which is, people sort of expect their government and their White House to sort of be buttoned up. They're just not clear, and they're not, it's again, and I don't know what to do about it other than people just have to keep complaining, and they have to complain up the food chain, and they have to make their, as much as they can make noise about this is ultimately not, if your goal is to have less inflation and an economy that grows, this is not the way to do it. But I can't tell you how that works.
Thanks, Steve. Just going out and myself today, there's half of the population believes in this presidency and in this Congress. Is it possible that there's some positive that comes out of what he's trying to do? Is there some way to look at this and say, hey, the stock market is not going to tank, our businesses are not going to tank, all of this, everything that we're doing every single day is not going to come to an end because of all of these policies, if all of these people still believe in what he's doing? So there are smart people who think that he's got a plan to the madness. And so where is the positive other than lower taxes and less regulation on some industries?
Well, I would just say I don't disagree with you, but I actually think that it's not half the country. I think he is, he won the election, no question. He got more than 50% of the vote. I think my analysis of the voters is that, and public polling shows this, there's a 35% just hardcore MAGA, never leaving them no matter what. There's another 15% who I've heard some pollsters call sort of MAGA curious, or who look, they liked, what people like about Donald Trump is he's authentic. Like it or not, this is who he is. He takes action, and there's a real bias, I think, among a lot of voters. They just want you, they're like, Washington screwed up, you people screwed up, my economic circumstances aren't as good as I want them, and I want you to do something about it. And Trump radiates everyday action. You can like his action, not like his action, but he's doing 14 things a day. And so he's authentic, he does action, and he commands attention constantly, which can be a plus or a minus. I think that 15%, the 16% that got him over 50 is right now very concerned. And I think, they are concerned because he promised them prices would get lower and prices aren't getting lower. I think they find the chaos can be a little, annoying. They don't like the fact that they got to drive grandma to the Social Security office instead of her being able to call. They don't like the fact that they heard there's some guy with measles just came through, Dulles Airport. There's a whole bunch of sort of anecdotal stuff that I think is starting to have an impact on that group of people where they're saying, this isn't quite what we wanted. But unfortunately, from a Democratic perspective, we don't have an election really until 2026 to do anything about it. I think the positive upside for him and for the country is less taxes, less regulation. There's an argument that leads to economic growth. There's also a counter argument that more debt and deficit, et cetera, what they're doing doesn't lead to growth. So I think, the positive is really based on what industry you're in. If you own an oil company, it's probably pretty good. Except Iran is probably not good. But again, the thing with Trump is there's just no through line that's clear, because you think, if you thought this is the policy, and this is going to be the policy for 2 years, and I can run my business based on knowing this is the policy, you can't. We don't know what the policy is, and the policy could change next week. And so I don't want to, I've always been a glass half full person, and I like to think about how is this all going to turn out in a good way at the moment. In the short term, it's pretty concerning. I'll let you pick.
Just following up on that question. Oh. All right, quick. Just following up on that question, I read recently that, you were talking about sort of what's his point, like where's he going with this, and is the upside. What I read recently was the point was more about sort of create as much instability as you can throughout all sorts of government so that you create a lot of uncertainty. People start to doubt government, which then allows the government to start to privatize. And that he is really interested in privatization, which allows him and the other billionaires of the world to make more money. So ultimately, like, that's the through line, and all of the other stuff is just about creating that chaos within government so that people get fed up.
That's a theory. I would say, again, I try not to be too partisan, but that's a pretty good theory. One more, or are we done?
We're unfortunately at time. Let's give it up for Steve. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you, Steve.